Hi everyone out there and everyone who is live streaming into this session. I'm so grateful, Beth, that you invited me, and so happy to be part of this series and really honored to be one of the women that is speaking at NDNU this year. I'm going to be talking about Minerva University, as Beth said, and while NDNU is 100 years old this year, we're 10 years old this year. So you'll see what it's like to experience in detail how Minerva came into being, what it's doing now, what it means, what the model is, and I hope that you find it interesting and thought-provoking, and you'll save up a lot of good questions for the end so that we have some time for discussion. One of the things that we do at Minerva is we use active learning. So I'm not used to talking for a long time, and I'm going to have to talk here for a while before we have Q&A. So I'll try to talk slow and help you absorb all of the different things that we're going to be hitting on today. This is our mission, nurturing critical wisdom for the sake of the world. So that tells you right off the bat that we are a university that cares about the world, about the globe. You'll see how that manifests as I describe what we do. The nurturing critical wisdom really means a lot of different things. One of the things that we focus on a lot is critical thinking and critical analysis, the ability to make good decisions. But critical wisdom also means something more. It really means more than the sum of the parts of your education that would add up to a graduate having something more than just knowledge and skills they gained in school, but values, attitudes, and the wisdom to make the right decisions. And that kind of wisdom is critical for the world, especially we see that right now with so many global problems that we're all facing together and that affect us in our daily lives. This is a little bit more detailed iteration of the mission, and we're kind of moving toward this as a new mission statement. And you see a picture of some of our students here. We prepare purpose-driven leaders and enterprising entrepreneurs from around the world to address the greatest challenges that the world is facing. And that's still evolving, the way that we frame that statement. We're working on a strategic plan right now, and we'll have a new mission statement soon. As Beth mentioned, we were really excited to be named the #1 top university in the world this year by an organization that's about 5 years old called World Universities with Real Impact. And it's co-sponsored by the UN, the Institute for Training and Research. And they ask universities and colleges and programs all over the world to submit applications. And as you can see, there are a number of really outstanding, big, established, prestigious universities that we competed with for this honor. We submitted in 5 out of 6 categories, I think, that we were invited to submit on, and came out at the top when they evaluated each of us on the categories where we submitted. So we tried real hard. We're hoping to have it again next year, but I know everybody else is going to be gunning for us. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got started and what was going on in higher ed at that time that made Ben Nelson, our founder, want to start this new university with a new model of education. We were seeing in higher education that employers were saying to us, your graduates aren't well prepared. They don't know how to work as a team, they don't write well, they don't have critical thinking, they're not doing a very good job for us. We have to train them how to write an email. And so they were complaining a lot. And we were hearing a lot about the value of a higher education not being so great anymore. And a lot of students considering not going to college and doing something else instead. There was also, oops, didn't mean to do that. There was also a big problem with the cost of higher education in the US especially. It just went up astronomically prior to the last 10 years when it settled down a little bit. And more students were racking up so much debt that they really couldn't start out life because they had so much debt. And there was nothing they could do about it, and they had to take the highest paying job possible to pay it back. That student loan debt crisis was huge. Another thing that we saw at that time was that a lot of institutions were opening up access to more and more students, but then the students weren't successful. They weren't being supported in the way they needed to be supported to be successful. So it was access, but not success. That was a big, big issue. And so all of those made us think, we want to do something different. We want to do something that is really looking at what's going on in the world, will prepare people to enter that world with the confidence and the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes that they're going to bring to bear on big problems like poverty, climate change, et cetera. You know, you could name your own list of them right now. Geopolitical conflict that's going on in dozens of countries around the world right now. So we thought, this is the problem we want to solve. We want to create a new model, and we took about to rethink just about everything. In that process, we used these guiding principles to help keep us on track. We tried to honor each one of these, being unconventional, driven, authentic, selective about how we spent our time, what we were going to offer, thoughtful, confident, and human. Those were the 7 guiding principles that are still our guiding principles, and that we honor in what we do. When we make decisions, we put them through that filter, and it keeps us on track and consonant with our original intent. Now, these are the 6 ways in which we did things differently. And I'm going to go through each one of them and tell you what we did differently. The first thing is that we're very global. We have a global student body. We have about 600 students now. We have students and alumni from 89 different countries. And that includes students in a small master's program along with our bigger undergraduate program. And then the students do global immersion in 7 cities, and I'll tell you what those are and how that works in a minute. We use project-based and experiential learning. So students are working in teams on projects based on real-life problems or that are, in fact, real-life problems. And I'll tell you all the ways in which we deploy that in our model. The third thing is a curriculum. We redesigned, in particular, what those of you that are educators know as general education. General education in the US is sort of the foundation before you go into your major and become more specialized. And what we decided to do was to rethink that model, which was typically what you think of as a cafeteria model. You have to take a social science course, an English course, a history course, a science or math course. We didn't want to use that discipline-based general education, but rather to think about what are the intellectual skills and knowledge students need to have to build on for their lifetime. So it's interdisciplinary also, and you'll see that when I talk about it. Fourth was our pedagogical approach. So lots of research done in the science of learning and active learning over the prior 20 to 30 years. And we really knew a lot as a society about how people learn, but it wasn't being deployed in classrooms in K-12 or in college or university education. So we were committed to using active learning that would actually improve students' learning, retention, ability to apply what they were learning. Fifth, you'll see we also wanted to deploy technology. A lot of advances in technology, as you all know, during those years prior to this last 10 years and since then. And we wanted to be able to deploy that technology in ways that would make the education more effective. And I'll tell you how we did that with a platform and the curriculum melded together. And then 6, we wanted to be able to provide an opportunity for for students from all over the world that were talented, that wanted this kind of an education, that were well enough prepared. They all had to speak English to get this kind of an education and really get the value out of it and contribute to the community, regardless of what their socioeconomic level was. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, and you'll be able to see that we give pretty generous financial aid to about 80% of our students. So that's how we started. Those are the essentials. I'm going to walk through all 6 of those, and then I'm going to talk about the outcomes, what our graduates are doing now so that you can see that. And then if you're interested, we can go back again a little bit to the Minerva history and how we developed. Does that sound good? Okay, so the global part of our character and mission. Here are kind of 3 different ways to look at that global component. One is the students from all over the world. I mentioned 89 different countries. There's no one country that predominates. Right now we only have about 12% students from the US. If you put all of the Asian countries together, that's about 30% of the student population, and that includes everything from Japan to India and the South Pacific Islands. So that's a big, big space. The students travel together all over the world, and I'll show you where they go. They spend a year in San Francisco and then go to 6 other cities. And when they're there, they're working on projects. And that's how they do their global immersion. They learn a little in advance about the city they're going to, some of the cultural norms, what to expect, what the housing is like, some of the things they're going to do while they're there. They get very excited, as you're going to see. I'm going to show you some videos. And then they learn intercultural competency. They develop a global perspective. So think of going to 7 cities and seeing how climate change is impacting 7 cities across the world and what each of those cities is doing about it. And that's a really powerful way to elevate students up beyond kind of the bubble that they're typically in when they go to college and are cloistered in a campus behind walls. We also have something we call the city as a campus. So we have residence halls and places that students live that are right in the middle of the cities. No barriers, no walls around them. So the students experience every day what it's like to live in that city, including our housing in San Francisco is on the corner of the Tenderloin district. So the students see unhoused people and drug use and all of the kinds of problems that we want them to be educated to solve. So that's sort of the power of the global model. This is where they go right now. We're rethinking this a little bit. We may be making some changes in the rotation, but they go from San Francisco to Seoul and then Hyderabad. So second year, they're in Seoul, South Korea, Hyderabad in spring, then Berlin in the fall of their 3rd year, and then Buenos Aires. You're going to see some students having a lot of fun and learning a lot in Buenos Aires. And in their last year, they go to London and then Taipei in their final semester. Then we bring them all back together for a month in San Francisco to present their capstone projects, which they will have been working on for over a year by the time they make it to that last point, and then they all have graduation together. Right now, our students are in cohorts of about 150. Some are a little larger, some a little smaller, but that's a really ideal number for students to get to know each other well, to bond as a community. And when you see them at graduation, you know that they are like a family that's going to last together forever. Whoops. Is this the video? So this is the first video, and this is, let me stop it a second. This is the first year students in San Francisco kind of waking up for the beginning of the semester, and you'll see a bunch of them, they'll talk, and you'll get a feeling of what our students are like. Whoops. Not doing this right. Give me a sec. It's this one? This one. Twice. I'm sorry.
Go one more back. One more back. And then forward. Okay, now go forward and go one more and stop clicking. One more click.
On the center?
No, to the side. Don't do the center one at all.
Sorry. So I'm smiling because that was our first graduating class when they were freshmen, and almost all of them graduated. Over 90% of them graduated. And I'm going to talk about two of them later on who started an amazing company just about a year ago, a couple of years after they were out of school. Part of what you saw there is some of the cultural immersion that they do and some of the civic projects without going into too much detail about them. But one of the things you saw is they're in a communal kitchen. So we don't do a meal plan. The students come their first day there, they move into their residence hall. It has a huge communal kitchen that 150 of them share. And we teach them how to use it safely and how to make their own food. And we take them out into the community and show them where they can go for food and buy food and bring it back. They all have a spot in the refrigerator, the big walk-in refrigerator. And it's part of helping to make them self-sufficient, before they go on this global rotation. Because we're trying to teach them the skills of adaptability and resilience so that they can go to these 7-city rotation and also face new things in life and feel like they have the confidence to deal with those things. So I just wanted to focus on that a little bit. Now I think I know how to do this next time. Sorry. So the second thing to talk about is the project-based and experiential learning, which you got a little of example of there. The whole class went to the Ai Weiwei exhibit that was held back then that was about political prisoners all over the world. And they all had to write a paper about it. And these are the ways, or this is just the principles of applied learning here. If a student applies what they're learning to a scenario in class that's new to them, that's really great. But when they go out and work in the community with a real problem, where they're going to be able to take what they're learning and put it to work on that problem, it's even more impactful. And it reinforces the learning in ways that are impossible to do without applying it that way. I'm sure all of you had experiences like that in your lives that are so memorable that what you learned from that is singed into your brain and is part of who you are now. So that kind of learning, we believe, really is more effective, more impactful, it's more long-lasting, it prepares students for work, and it also prepares them to work with one another and other people. And we know that problems are not solved by one person sitting in a room alone, especially now. It's teams of people, and preferably teams of people from very different backgrounds, because those teams are more creative, more productive. They come up with better solutions to problems. So that's part of what we're trying to do with applied learning. And these are the ways that we deploy applied learning in our curriculum and in student life outside of class. One thing is location-based assignments. Every class that a student takes, and they take 3 or 4 classes each semester, different subjects, and each semester has a location-based assignment where the student has to go in the community and do something relevant to what they're learning in class and then writing a paper about it. And so that's part of the mandatory curriculum. Another thing we do is civic projects. So you saw in there the mayor of San Francisco's chief innovation officer and the officer who works with unhoused people in San Francisco. Our students did projects that were year-long that addressed a lot of the issues of homelessness in San Francisco. Students were called upon to think about better ways to do housing, better ways to serve people medical care. One group redesigned the lobby of Kaiser so that it would be more friendly to unhoused people and they'd be able to move people through it more efficiently. Another group designed a place that could be converted from a sleeping space into a bench in a park. So they did really interesting projects like that. They're given a sponsor, an NGO or a corporation, a government office, and they're asked to solve a problem, an intractable problem that that agency or company has, and then they go to work in teams, and by the end of the year, they have a finished project. They present it at a big symposium. And then those projects are also offered in each of the cities. Not every student chooses to do them, but they're offered in every city. And then finally, there is the integrated learning and cultural immersion, where the students are learning beforehand and during each of the cities, and they start to get that multicultural global perspective. And I'll talk more about that later because it's part of our learning outcomes. This is what we're trying to do. Some more photos of our wonderful students working together in groups. I think looks like they're making robots, which they did for one of their projects. And so now I'll talk about the curriculum, the actual courses that the students take. Our curriculum is completely reinvented from what most institutions offer. It has some of the same characteristics, and on paper it might look like what any other college or university might do, because it does have general education And then students take a major where they get more specialized and learn more deeply, so they get breadth and then depth. And then they also can take elective courses in areas they like. That's sort of the bucket of a 4-year undergraduate liberal arts degree, but we filled it up with different stuff. And one of the things I want to focus on here is the general education aspect of it. Here's what we were thinking about with the curriculum. 3 of the characteristics of it that are important. Something we call practical knowledge, which means it's not knowledge that's just purely knowledge for knowledge's sake or just esoteric, but it has to be able to be applied in the world and be useful in the world to solve problems. It's part of what goes up to that idea of critical wisdom, right? It's not vocational, so we're not teaching them technical skills, but we are teaching them how to think and how to reason. Integrated learning means that the students are integrating their life inside and outside of the classroom. And then finally, it's interdisciplinary. In the first year, instead of the students taking those courses in those different subjects, different disciplines, they're taking 4 courses, and disciplinary content might show up from many different areas in any one of those courses. Here are the things that we think of as general education, which are really at the heart of a Minerva education. There are 4 big competencies that we wanted to develop in our students: critical, creative thinking, effective communication, and effective interaction. And the 4 first-year courses really focus on these big competencies. And then if you drill down a little deeper, you'll see these are just sort of subcategories. What we did with each of these big 4 is we broke it down into the elements. Critical thinking isn't one thing. It's actually about 20 different intellectual skills that you need to have in order to deploy critical thinking effectively and broadly over the course of your lifetime. So these are some examples of the kinds of things that are covered in each of those big 4 areas. And what these are called is habits of mind and foundational concepts, these learning outcomes that students are intended to master by the time they graduate. And they're introduced them and practice them in the first year and then throughout the whole 4 years, which is something that's really unusual. Most times in general education, take your courses in the first couple years, and if you're not in that field, you might never use that writing course or that math course again. In this case, all 80 habits of mind and foundational concepts are actually taught and practiced throughout the student's education. So a habit of mind is a cognitive skill, and you see that here, and here's some examples. How do you characterize the nature of a problem to be solved? We call that right problem. Before you start solving a problem, you got to know what the right problem is, right? So those are the kinds of things that we're teaching people in habits of mind. We call them habits of mind because we hope that over time they become automatically the way that you think about something when you see a problem. You can spot and see, oh, I need to think about how do I identify and classify the variables in this system. And then foundational concepts are fundamental knowledge that's broadly applicable that you're going to use for a lifetime, like understanding the difference between correlation and causation, use of statistics, biases, how to identify them, how to mitigate them, and then multiple causation in a complex system. So those are just examples. It's really exciting to see when the students start, they don't understand that they're really learning anything until about the 3rd or 4th week, and then they start to realize, oh, yes, that they'll look around them and they'll start using the hashtags that we use to abbreviate things like hashtag audience, hashtag right problem, hashtag confirmation bias, and they'll be walking around labeling everything with these HCs. This is just, you can't read it from here, but what it shows you is the 4, and then those subcategories I showed, and then all 80 of the habits of mind and foundational concepts that are abbreviated with a hashtag. The other thing that we do in our curriculum, in addition to that, you know, the HCs in the first year and the 4 big courses, and they're all covered throughout the entire education. The students have to use them in their capstones, and they're graded on their use of the HCs all 4 years. In addition to that and their majors, we have something we call integrated learning outcomes, which are very much built on those habits of mind and foundational concepts, but they're deployed for the most part outside of the classroom. So we see them in student life when students are in the cities. They are these 5. Probably if you're an educator out there, they're all things that you would want college students to get. But we try to be very intentional and transparent about what we're trying to do with our students. And these are the kinds of habits and values and attitudes we want them to have. Self-management and wellness is about being able to take care of yourself, manage your time, take time for yourself, exercise, be mentally and physically healthy, and be able to take care of yourself as you travel across the globe. Interpersonal engagement has to do with the way that you interact with other people in our community, but then also as you go out and present yourself. Civic responsibility speaks for itself. Those civic projects, volunteer work, feeling a sense of responsibility to your own community and beyond. Intercultural competency, which is kind of morphing into something that is a little more elevated, which is more like global consciousness or global perspective, which is what we want our students to have as they take themselves out into the world and go to different cultures. They need to have cultural humility, they need to have openness and curiosity, and they need to think about problems from multiple perspectives. And then professional development, which is really about their readiness to go out into the world. So the students take a half-unit course every semester, which gives them about 20 hours a semester to plan for themselves on what they're going to improve, to reflect, and to assess how they're doing. A lot of this is focused on the global consciousness and intercultural competency, because that's something that doesn't necessarily come by itself. So at Minerva, we have these eager students who want to study very much in a multicultural global student body and want to travel all over the world. That doesn't mean they know how to do it. We have to give them a framework for doing it and a set of skills that go along with that. So that one is a heavy emphasis in there. And students have coaches from their very first semester, which helps them with all 5 of these integrated learning outcomes. So pedagogy, based on the science of learning, we have with us in the audience tonight a former dean from Minerva, Brian Ross, Dr. Brian Ross, who is an expert in this field and was very helpful to us in the social science major and in building in findings from the science of learning into the way that we teach. So I felt like I had to introduce you, Brian. Can't stand here and talk about this when he knows more about it than I do. So what we're trying to do is engage students to achieve deep and long-lasting learning, to be able to apply their learning forever. And these are some of the characteristics of active learning and some of the things that we believe it does. Active learning rather than lecture, deeper, longer lasting. In our classes, students are actively engaged in each class. They're asked to participate. We have no lectures. No lectures. No one speaks for more than 3 to 5 minutes. The students are called upon to engage in activities, different activities, sometimes every 10, 15 minutes, all throughout a class. So they have to be actively engaged, and when they're actively engaged, they're going to learn more. And the learning actually takes place both before class, because they have to prepare ahead of time. Every class starts with a quiz. It's called a poll. And the professor puts up, and they have to answer a question, and then the professor looks at that and says, well, half of you think one way and half think the other. Go back to the drawing board in your small groups and figure out what's the right answer here. So they're really very well prepared and actively involved. And then the students are assessed almost every class session, but they're assessed in some class every week. And that feedback goes onto the students' homepage there for our forum, which I'm going to show you in a minute, so they get that feedback and they can learn where they're doing well and where they're not. And all of that is built into our technology. And the technology, the video-based seminars are small too. All of the classes, all the class sessions have 15 to 20 students in them, and the average is probably about 16 or 17, which also allows deep engagement, right? You can't do that in a class of 100 as easily as you can in a class that small. And this is what's built into the system. Maximum 20 students. We try to keep a large percentage of the students engaged all the time. So even if a student is talking, other students might be asked to respond or to evaluate what that student is saying, for example. Breakout groups, I already mentioned. There's a number of other techniques that you see here. They're sometimes co-drafting documents, they're evaluating. They sometimes start a response and then the teachers ask someone else to finish it. All kinds of strategies like that are built in. The faculty co-create lesson plans. So another thing that's a little bit unusual about Minerva that I probably won't talk about much is the faculty model. But the faculty teach a pretty heavy load, but they don't have to research, and they have to love teaching and love working with students because that's their main function. And they work together so collaboratively. It's really amazing. So all the first-year teachers, for example, that are teaching one subject get together every week, and they talk about what worked and what didn't work in the lesson plan and with their students, and they refine it then the next time that they're teaching it. So it's an incredibly collaborative process. And then the platform, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, it has a faculty-facing version that helps the faculty member determine who's participating and who's not, and so that they can ask questions and get re-engaged a student who might be drifting off. This is live, synchronous, and it looks kind of like this. So you can see here, neither of these people is the teacher. The teacher doesn't always have himself or herself in center stage. This is a discussion going on. Here are all the students up here. You can't see it, but their names are under there. And these two students are talking about something. They might be debating. And this was a document that they worked on together. There's a chat over here. What you can't see is there's also, on the teacher's view, the teacher has the whole lesson plan over here. And underneath the students' live images there is a heat bar that shows who's talked too much and who hasn't talked enough. And it's hard to track that when you're teaching a class, right? But this really reveals that. And then you can get the most students engaged in the most effective way. So this is really, the technology really helped us to bring together those active learning strategies that we so believe in, and to embed them into the instruction so that it isn't just, oh, we're going to use active learning and then every teacher does what they want. They have to construct their class in a particular way and teach it in a particular way. And the teachers get a lot of feedback when they first start and a lot of help and support. And it really works. Whoops, I skipped one. So affordability and the financial support for students, I mentioned before. Our tuition and fees are about half, maybe a little bit more than half of what most selective private undergraduate institutions charge. And we do that because we don't own buildings, we don't have climbing walls, we don't have meal plans, we don't do extensive amounts of research, we just don't have a huge amount of infrastructure, and we're committed to keeping that infrastructure as low as we possibly can. And one of the things that we're committed to is not paying for anything that is not going to contribute directly to the growth, development, and learning of students. So these are the principles behind the financial model. The first one I just mentioned. We don't participate in federal financial aid. Of course, remember, we only have 12% US students, 10 or 12%, so it probably wouldn't be worth it for us to do that, to only serve that many students. A lot of bureaucracy involved with that all the students would have to pay for, right? I mentioned we don't own buildings. There's a focus on teaching, not research. And we try not to coddle our students. We're trying to think of it as like Olympic training for the next generation of leaders. We challenge them. We don't put them behind a wall. We try to teach them to engage with the world and to build the resilience they need to lead. And then we support promising students, whatever their means. So if a student can get into Minerva, they're going to get financial aid. And we don't consider their financial situation when we process their admissions. Right now, about 80% of the students get financial support, and it comes from us. So we have to pay for that, which costs a lot of money. So we have to raise a lot of money. And we just recently got a really big gift that we're very happy about that will cover a lot of financial aid for a lot of students. Of those on financial aid, you can see, partly because they come from all over the world, including countries that are very poor, our students are pretty poor. They are pretty financially challenged. More than 56% are under $50,000 a year family income, and 40% under $25,000. And they're paying their tuition in American dollars, in US dollars. And that's why that really matters. So that's the financial picture. This is a quote from one of our students who's going to graduate in May. She's a big influencer. She comes out of London, and this was a quote that she gave to us that I wanted to share with you. And this is Buenos Aires. Whoops. Go back. Now?
Here we share everything. Like
Yeah, she said it. The project they worked on for the Ministry of Education is really interesting. There is a very high dropout rate in middle and high school in Argentina, especially in the rural areas. So the students went out after learning about that problem and studying statistics and talking to all those people you saw them in the room with, and the Minister of Education himself. They went out and visited rural schools where the attrition rate is so high, and came up with, you know, a multi-part plan for how that could be changed. And because I think they were partly good at it, because they're also just a little bit older of these kids whose lives were being affected by dropping out of school, and they could relate to them and understand them in ways that, that the rest of us might not be able to. So I hope you enjoyed your trip, your brief trip to Buenos Aires. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about how this has worked out. So we now have about 600 graduates, 550 of them from the undergraduate program. And this is how we prepare them for life after Minerva. In addition to their curriculum and student life, they do internships and get research appointments. We don't do anything right now in the summer except give them the space and the opportunity to use that time for an internship or a research appointment. And after the first year, they can also do those during term time if they have the time. We don't want them to work more than 10 hours a week during school, or if their academic performance starts going down. We do give them a coach from the very beginning, and we spend the first year working closely with each student to help them figure out what their values are, what their purpose is in life, to develop a sense of agency around that. And we talk to them about planning your Minerva journey. What are you going to do during your Minerva journey? Which partly means, what are you going to do in your summer? What kind of internship, what kind of job is going to help you to build your portfolio so that when you graduate, you're clear about what you want to do, and you've got not only your degree from Minerva and all your experience, but this portfolio of experiences to share. And this is our outcomes so far. We have about a 90% graduation rate. About 88% of that is within the normative 4 years they're supposed to graduate, but there are always a few stragglers who don't finish their capstones in time. 95% of them are pursuing what they want to do, what they set out to do, right away within a year after graduation, and that can mean a job, or starting a company, or going to grad school or professional school. So all of those who applied to grad school so far, every single one of them that applied to a prestigious school got into their first choice school. We are about to have our first graduate from Harvard Law School, who's a lovely young woman from China. I just met with her last week. And 13% of our graduates started or founded or co-founded a company or a nonprofit, some kind of a business. You could hear a lot of them get very interested in education when they come to Minerva, and we have a whole bunch of ed tech, education technology entrepreneurs among our alumni. Here's examples of a few of our graduates and what they've done, just to give you an idea of the creative things that they've done. You saw in the first video those two young women, Roja and Alicia, one from China, one from Sweden, who started a company called Seabound. And Seabound puts carbon capture equipment on big ships in the ocean. They got amazing funding and have dozens of contracts now. They were very interested in solving the climate, one aspect of climate change. And this is how they got together, two people from different parts of the world with completely different lives before they met at Minerva and did this. And they're incredibly successful. They're about to get a big award, but I can't announce it because it isn't official yet. I think they just graduated in 2019. So they started this company 2 or 3 years after they graduated. These two folks in the middle, who are now married, are two students who were trapped in Buenos Aires during COVID. And during that time, Ahmed invented a robotic arm that allows students to have a lab experience on their computer operating a robotic arm remotely. And we're in the process of helping him to get a patent for that. And Boucle was his assistant working on that, and they won this big 2021 Microsoft Award, Innovation Award, called Imagine Cup in the education category. He's working at Amazon now. She's working at a school, helping them to deploy in K-12 education active learning strategies. They're up in Seattle. And Alberto started something called Transcend Network, which is one of those new companies. It's for profit. It's got, you see there, 188 founders, 40 countries. They get funding. They dole out funding to people who have good ideas about how to change education or work. And he's become like, he publishes a newsletter every month, and now I'm starting to see his newsletter quoted by other more prestigious newsletter, prognosticating about what's going to happen next in education or in our work lives. And he's from Spain. Oh, he was one of Forbes 30 under 30 about 2 years ago. And then we recently got our first Rhodes Scholar, so we're very proud of that. And then one of our students got the Diana Award, which is named after Princess Diana, for work that she's done through an organization that does tutoring for poor students. So it's working out pretty well. We're pretty proud of the results. Here are some of the employers. There's a little bit of a overemphasis on sort of big, fancy companies here, I think, but because there are dozens of smaller and less prestigious companies that our students work at and nonprofits that aren't listed here. And then there are some of their grad schools. This is just a quote from Senator Bob Kerrey. You may remember him as a possible presidential candidate a while back, and the senator from Nebraska. And he was president of New School in New York. And our founder met him to talk to him about his ideas for starting Minerva. And Bob absolutely fell in love with our ideas. And when he left New School, he became the chair of what was then a small board and now is the governing board of the university. He just stepped down in May to do other things, but he was in that role for almost 10 years. So that's really the big story. I'll show you this just really quickly. In the beginning, 10 and a half years ago, I was the 4th person that Ben Nelson hired to work with him because of my background in higher education and in academics and in accreditation. And he wanted to create the university so it would get accredited right away, and I was going to be able to help him do that. About half of the people that worked with us in the beginning were not professional educators. All of the academics, like Brian, were, but everybody else was from some other field. And that really made for a lot of creativity and a lot of new ideas coming into, especially the way that we did things outside of class. So we started in 2012. We had our first students in fall 2013 in a small kind of pilot class. Then they took a year off and rejoined our inaugural class. And that's when we got our graduating class, our first one in 2019. We started a smaller Masters of Decision Analysis program along the way and had graduates from that in 2017. We decided to apply for accreditation shortly after, on our own, shortly after our first graduating class. Prior to that, we were being incubated in another accredited institution called Keck Graduate Institute, which is one of the Claremont colleges. So we really opened our doors as an educational institution in a nonprofit and accredited before we even had our first students through our relationship with them. And we were able to persuade our accreditor that that was something they should endorse. And then we got accreditation right after our first opportunity to do so, our first visit in 2021. And I was the founding president, served in that role as either interim or regular president for about 3.5 years, and we just recently appointed our second president. This is a relationship that you might be interested. There's something, and I put this up here only to, I hope, clarify if there's any confusion. There are two different organizations with the name Minerva, and the one that we've been talking about is Minerva University, which was actually created and funded for many years by a for-profit venture capital funded entity called Minerva Project. And Minerva Project is the one that invested in and owns that forum and the other intellectual property of Minerva. So we have a contract with them, but they don't control us, and we're a completely separate nonprofit. So, time for questions. I hope you all have a lot.